you for tuning in to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WLH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Be sure to subscribe by hitting the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Asking if you are change ready may seem outrageous given the pandemic and the impact on every aspect of our life in the last year. Constant disruption plagued our daily lives and how we worked. Teams have had to use widespread collaborative platforms and work processes that have evolved to accommodate the different types of projects and challenges that organizations and teams faced as the marketplace was disrupted. Today, as we start to emerge from the pandemic, organizations are re-examining what they've learned and redefining the future. And we know that organizational change is here, and companies will fundamentally shift their commercial models, their ways of going about research, and just about every other component of their work. So in short, we're all very much change experienced. But the question I have is, are we really change ready? Because change ready speaks to a mindset where an individual can individually accept and adapt to the pace of change and how it changes their work, who they work with, how they work, and just in general, every facet of their life. But I want to spend some time today talking about beyond mindset. Do organizations, teams, and individuals have the right will set and skill set to help organizations effectively deal with change and get the right type of results? So before I introduce today's guest, who I'm so excited to have on the show, I want to reaffirm our philosophy around large-scale change, which is that change, to be effective, needs to be addressed at three levels: at the organizational, at the team, and individual level. And purposeful change execution requires change-ready leaders at all levels. So in today's episode, I want to have a conversation with Tianna, who's an associate consultant at the firm, and she's crucial in working and leading the Learning Solutions division. So I thought it'd be really interesting today to have Tianna and I tag team on the impact of change from an organizational perspective and from a learner's needs, so you can thrive in today's environment. So welcome, Tianna.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Wendy. I'm very happy to be here as usual. Just approaching everything, I think you have a really good concept here, thinking about it from, the consulting, when you step in and are helping leaders and organizations in this capacity, but also from a learning perspective, right? Because as we have the two divisions of WLH with the Learning Solutions division, I think it's a really important conversation to have. So with that in mind, I hope you don't mind, but I already had a question for you. It's something that I've been thinking about for a little bit. And I'm curious just around all of the swirl, all of the stuff that we have seen happening over the last year and some change. How has that kind of solidified your belief that leaders and individual contributors really need to be equipped and be change ready in order to actually thrive despite all of the chaos that's happening around us?
What reaffirmed my belief in the importance is all the early missteps that we had a front row to. Change was something that was always thought of as a big event. Organization was going to go through a large scale change. So we spent time working with clients to shore up the leaders so they understood the change. They could then execute it with their teams. They could work with their individuals. But it was always seen as event driven. And what happened when the pandemic first hit was organizations and leaders were scrambling. The basics. First, they need to get a platform by which they could even communicate with each other. Zoom licenses, Viva on demand, and all of those things. So they weren't prepared because the infrastructure wasn't there, nor was a mindset of continuous change, flexibility, and agility to its truest sense. And what we saw is after the big, oh my gosh, well, we've got something that's going to be here for a while, and we really need to adapt, and we need to adapt quickly. We worked, as you know, very hard with leaders to equip them to develop change, leadership, agility skills. We worked with them to help them become more empathetic. We helped them to understand the importance of really checking in with their people, because people's lives were turned upside down. So if I ever had a belief, the belief I had based on almost 30 years of experience, I would double or triple and put it on steroids, because I think that change is here to stay. It could be big, maybe in the early days, but it's going to continue to be iterative. And I think that organizations at every level, of individual contributor or leaders to the most executive leaders, need to be change ready from a skill set perspective.
I'm really glad that you said that, though, because I find, and we have found just in our firm and in the work that we've done, that there's a distinct difference, right, between the organizations that do this thing really, really well and the organizations that kind of falter and trudge their way through it. And I'm curious, I think you kind of just spoke to it around those three levels. So correct me if I'm wrong. I heard you say organizational, team, and individual, right? That's what you said?
Absolutely. But let me put a little color commentary around that. Organizations, at the organizational level, you're anticipating what's that strategic shift. So we know, Tianna, you helped me in the last several years as we've been building up this Change and Thrive suite to really understand that we know that organizations fail for two reasons. One, they don't have an implementation cascade, and two, leaders are not equipped to lead others through transition. So what we've tried to do at the organizational level is make sure they have a plan, and they've associated their risks with the plan, that they ensure that people are also skilled around it, but there's a plan. And at the team level, leaders have got to be able to translate that, right, to their team as to what these strategic shifts mean. And then individuals need to be able to tie that back to their role. So that's why our philosophy is very much organizational, team, and individual.
I know that you're right. Through a lot of the work that we've done on the learning side of things, we've been extremely intentional about pulling through those different levels. Again, I'm really, really glad you brought that up. I think, and I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the people listening to this episode right now. So if that was me, I think I would want even more of a breakdown around some of the different tips, actionable things that we could be doing as leaders in our own organizations at each level. Is that something you would be willing to share with us?
So at the organizational level, it's really important that you establish the business case for change. If you're changing a commercial model, or you're moving to a hybrid sales model, you've got to communicate the business case, the why. And we know that if you don't link those messages to the strategic purpose, vision, and direction, there's a breakdown. So that's the first tip under organizational. I think the other thing that's a really important second tip is it's important very much to respond quickly when in crisis, by really being true to the organizational values and beliefs and paying attention to the employees and your stakeholders' health and welfare as individuals. And that's where the empathy had really shown up. I think the third is, if we can predict or look towards the future, creating a learning organization that is continuous around building capability of new ways to learn and being change agile and being flexible is critical. And ensuring that your rewards and recognition systems are in place to reward those employees who can step up and adapt and serve as change champions. And the other two tips at the organizational level is really the communication. Organizations have tons of communication platforms. They should use those to get the messages, because we know it takes 7 or 8 times for people to hear a message. And as many ways that you can do that is great. And then the last tip would be, if you've got a vision and you've connected it you have a strategy, and you're doing all these things around communication and trying to move the needle, put some metrics in place to track your progress, to see how you're doing so you can calibrate and titrate.
You know, what strikes me about all of those tips, first of all, phenomenal tips. Thank you for sharing them. But also, there's a lot of small pieces that go into addressing any change at the organizational level, right? I keep hearing I'll throw out a couple that I heard you say, talking about linking the message to the purpose, vision, and direction, responding quickly when in crisis, making sure that we're recognizing when employees are doing well and stepping up and really being champions of the change. That's a lot of little pieces to be able to manage effectively. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's why it's really important that you prepare your leaders. It used to be that you could throw somebody into the deep water and hope that they could swim. Lots of organizations will give people stretch assignments and say, oh, let's see how it's going to happen. But with everything that's going on and everything that will continue to evolve, I think you have to be much more purposeful in the development of those capabilities.
That's why, for me, I'll go ahead and toot our own horn. That's why I'm so excited about the blended learning solutions that we were able to put together based on these 30 plus years of consulting that the firm has been a part of, particularly in the pharma and healthcare industry, right? Because as I even think about it again, just all of those moving pieces, it's got to be helpful to have a set of resources and tools and different things that can help guide these leaders as they work to manage the change. What's been your favorite part? I'm curious.
I'm sorry, my favorite part? I think my favorite part is really helping leaders to understand that they've got to be prepared first, right? That it's not, I need to understand and commit to the business case or change. I need to establish a learning plan. I've got to get myself in check first before I can lead others. And I just want to take a quick minute and make a distinction. We're talking about change. Change is something that's done to you, right? The pandemic changed things. The organizations went remote. That was done to you. Your priorities changed. That was done to you. Transition is how a person responds, how they get from what was done to them and get from point A to point B. And I think helping leaders to understand that they are leading through transition to guide their teams and guide individuals is absolutely critical.
That is such a good call out. And it makes me excited because even as I think about the Change and Thrive suite that you've put together, when I think about the 5 C's of transition leadership or RX for retention, that's what those programs are for, right? They're to help these leaders guide their teams, guide their people through the transition, just so, again, they're not just surviving like many of us had to do in 2020, they're actually thriving through it. So that's probably my favorite part if I had to throw mine in there.
Yes, and I think you took a pretty lead role, but you mentioned something about retention. So I just want to spend a quick second there.
Okay.
I think that with everything that has gone on in this last 14 months, really, what we found is we lost 4 million women to the workforce, that organizational constraints around where people need to live to be able to work is changing. And as organizations are reopening, the country is reopening, and when I mean they're returning to work and they're reimagining the future, it's going to be really important to pay attention to the retention of key talent. Because, last year the future was less certain. As we move towards the future, people are going to have options. So I think leaders need to, for sure, their change leadership skills, their ability to lead through transition. They also have to be able to identify and spot warning signs of those high-performing talent that they want to keep and intervene early. So that's something that I think still lives at that organizational level.
Good point. So I'm curious, shall we move on to talk about teams then, since you kind of fleshed out organizational for us?
Sure. So, and I think this is the most important job a leader has, and that's really working with their team. And the first thing is they've got to be able to guide their team But it's important for them to understand that others adapt to change on a variable, right? And new ways of working. Not everybody's like, great, I'm ready to go. Everybody's going to be sort of at a different space and place, and a leader's got to really assess that individual team and recognize how the revised strategy may impact the team, and they need to adjust where it's needed. They also should be, besides setting that strategic direction and connecting what it means to the team, they need to think about how these teams can work better together to achieve those strategic goals. And oftentimes they're going to need to revisit roles, responsibilities, and the collaborations of those team members. And the last piece that I think is really important is to make sure that they take the time to establish the ways of working. Now, how are we going to support each other, build a team in the spirit of working towards one goal? And I think those are really important at the team level, and celebrating those wins along the way. Now, one of the things we're hearing is you may still have the same leader and the same team, but you're needing to reset priorities, vision, roles, and ways of working, especially as people return back to work.
I love the focus on making sure the team is still a part of that conversation. I think that's probably what stands out to me the most, because even just in my experience, and I'd love your perspective on it too, I find that when change is happening and things are chaotic, a lot of times leaders are just go, 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 moving very quickly. But taking the time to kind of, I know the term we always use is jumpstart the team, right? So taking the time to jumpstart the team and make sure that we're revisiting the mission, the vision, the values, making sure we're still aligned on the ways that we're working. That is probably the next level of leadership that we've seen is missing a lot of times.
Yes, or it's superficial. It's let's have a quick conversation and this is how we're going to be working and off we go. And I think it's important, especially at this point in time, for leaders to really lean into taking the time with their teams, reset strategic direction, confirm roles and responsibilities, how they're going to work together. So you're really doing a mental health check of your team and optimizing it for the best performance. And oftentimes it's the quick Zoom call or announcement, and it's just not going to get it done. And those teams are not performing.
Not enough, right?
No, absolutely not enough. And I think that teams will continue to be resetting throughout the year. And those frequent touch points are going to be important at that level here.
Absolutely. Especially if change is always happening and it's continuing, why wouldn't we continue to reset our teams? It makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And I think that we spend a lot of time preparing and assembling a lot of our tried and true experiences and tools to really make it easy for leaders so they can deploy. But really at the top of the house, starting from the strategy to how they work together, is really critical at that team level.
Oh, yes, I can speak for you, Wendy, as the person who received all of the goodness to take and turn it into a blended learning solution under our learning division. You gave them all of the tools and resources and everything you possibly can to make this a much easier kind of rinse and repeat process without being superficial, like you mentioned. So you did that.
We had some fun with it. We talk about leaders, we talk about teams, but organizations and teams are made up of individuals. And I think that the tips here, from my perspective, is you need to make sure as an individual, you're real reflective of your own change readiness. And you have to be honest about your reaction to any of the organizational changes and your willingness to commit. And I've talked to some people and they're just like, the organization's going in this direction. I don't want to get on that bus. I want to get off the bus. Okay, get off the bus. But you've got to individually be honest with yourself in terms of, are you change ready? Do you have that will set? Because if you want to change, it's easy to acquire the skill set for agility. It's not hard, but you've got to want to. I also think that it's important that individuals, when so much changes happen, have that conversation to make sure they're clear about roles and responsibilities and how that change is impacting it. And then what learning or new learning do they need? I mean, a really simple example is last year, most sales professionals did not know how to do a virtual detail on a Zoom, on a Teams, and they had to learn how to do that. So it's assessing not only your change agility, but your learning agility and where you have gaps in knowledge to be able to perform. And I think it's also really important at the individual level to determine what all of these components mean to you and ensure that you are not only change agile, you're learning agile, you've got that flexibility, but you're really committed personally to maximizing your role to support your team's vision and the organization's strategic direction.
Absolutely. It all starts at the individual level. And when I think about, I just keep envisioning our process as we started building out these learning solutions and thinking through what are people actually going through right now. It strikes me that the change agility and the learning agility truly is kind of the undercurrent that any individual contributor, whether they're in a leadership capacity or frontline, everybody needs to be change agile and learning agile so that we can continue to layer on those other skill sets. So when we get the call that we have to learn how to have a sales call digitally, virtually, our entire world is not blown up, right?
Absolutely. What I would say is if we think about the learnings from last year and through this year, we know that your ability to tolerate simultaneous and ongoing change is going to be critical. There's a certain skill set, will set around that individuals and leaders need to fully embrace. Otherwise, they're going to struggle as more continues to unfold. I mean, we just executed some research recently. It appears that about 50% of the organizations in life sciences are going to be changing and modifying their commercial model. Think about how many people that impacts. It's tons, thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals in an organization potentially. So agility at all levels is critical, and your willingness to continue to evolve, it needs to be supported.
I am extremely grateful, honestly, that you were able to break down each of the levels and give everybody some actionable tips. You know me, as the person who's running point on a lot of the learning stuff, I'm always trying to figure out how can we make sure that people can take action based on the stuff that we're sharing with them. So I am so excited and honored that I was able to be a part of creating this Change and Thrive suite. And I'm really excited for everybody to have the opportunity to get their hands on it all. But I won't spill all the beans, Wendy. I'll let you kind of wrap us up and close us out.
Well, what I would really say is change readiness really requires an honest assessment of your tolerance for disruption and resilience in overcoming fear and anxiety and resistance. And most everyone has tested their change readiness capacity, capability this past year. And I think it's important. This is a good time to reflect and ask yourself, can you identify a mindset or skill set or will set gap that needs additional development in the area of changing and thriving? And do that assessment for yourself. Because once you identify that gap, then you can look to close that gap. And that will make you even a better performer at every level of the organization. If you find that you do need support, WLH Consulting has 30 years of experience in helping organizations support large-scale change. And I'm really excited to talk about the Change and Thrive suite, which is really the learning solutions to address all of the types of challenges that we've really been speaking about on this podcast. So I would say if you really want to find out how to be change ready at any level, you can schedule an exploratory call or check out the new Change and Thrive suite, which is at changeandthrive.org. That's what I'd like to really say is take a minute, think about where you are, think about where you have gaps in the world of change, and look to close those gaps. You'll be stronger and better for it. So Tianna, thank you so much for today. Any last minute comments?
Honestly, I would just say whoever's listening to this right now, you have an opportunity to go out into this world, go into your organization and change and thrive. And I'm really excited to see what you do with it. So thank you for having me, Wendy.
Well, thanks so much, and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.